Hello, everyone, and welcome to another entrant in our Crisis to Resilience series here at Canada 2020. Today, we're talking about keeping Canada connected, and I'm very thankful that you've all had a chance to tune in today. And I want to thank all of our participants who will be joining us over the next little bit. We've got a really jam-packed agenda to get through. Given the topic of today's conversation and this week's announcement on the Universal Broadband Fund, which was a perfect table setter for today's conversation, we got a lot to get to. I'm going to quickly go through our run of show for today, and then I'll talk a little bit about sort of how we're setting the conversation. Thank you all to those of you joining us on Zoom, and also to those of you who are tuning in on YouTube. Today at 1:30, as part of this conversation, we'll be joined by the Honourable Marianne Montseff, who is the Minister of Rural Economic Development and Women and Gender Equality. She'll be sitting down in conversation with Sarah Minnis. She's the President of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Fund. So that's happening at 1:30. Right now, we have just a fantastic and a rock star panel talking about some of the, I think, more enabling pieces of what we're trying to build here with improved connectivity. We have the good fortune of being joined by Simon Kennedy, the Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Michelle Beck, who is the Vice President of North American Sales at Telesat, Dean Prevost, who's the President of Rogers for Business, and Willa Black, who is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Cisco. It is a real pleasure to see you all here. My note to the folks tuning in on the live stream, we're going to do our best to get to some of your questions that you may have. If you're tuning in by Zoom, send them in via the Zoom chat function. And if you're watching on YouTube, send it by the YouTube chat. Our team is going to do our best to get to each and every one of you. I am going to move now to our panel conversation. I'll just simply say welcome. Thank you all very much for joining us here on our Keeping Canada Connected event. How are you all doing today? Simon, I'll start with you.
Doing fine. People watching online can probably detect that this is not actually me standing in front of the Innovation, Science and Economic Development building, but you don't want to see what my spare bedroom looks like. We're fortunate at ISED actually to have quite good connectivity. So I've been in and out of the office as needed, to go to cabinet meetings and things like that. But as an institution, almost all of our staff are working from home. And I think it is a testament to the connectivity we enjoy. And it's been a real godsend during the pandemic.
Absolutely. And I should say, I mean, Simon, this panel that we have here today with Dean from Rogers, Willa from Cisco, Michelle from Telesat, I mean, Canada 2020, we've built it, I think, quite intentionally to try and capture people who are sort of across the connectivity ecosystem and try to get a good handle on what we're trying to enable by improving connectivity across the country. Dean, Willa, Michelle, I'm going to get to you shortly, but Simon, I thought I would start with you because, as was mentioned in the announcement this week, the announcement of the $1.75 billion Universal Broadband Fund was an acknowledgement that these issues aren't new, right? But certainly that the pandemic has brought them to front of mind. I'm curious, Simon, can just as a way of our into this conversation today, can you give us a sense of the problem that we're trying to solve? And then we can maybe get into some of the ways in which we do that. But like, scope out the issue for me.
Sure. Well, I mean, the immediate, the immediate proximate problem, if you like, that we're trying to solve, for example, Alex, with the launch of the Universal Broadband Fund, is we want to make sure that all Canadians have access to high-speed internet. And so that, there is a remaining gap that's significant. And the government set an objective to have all Canadians connected to high-speed internet. And with the investments made through the UBF, we're hoping by 2026 to reach 98% of the population. So there'll still be a small number of Canadians where we have to, take additional steps that live in particularly hard to reach areas, but we want to get broad coverage of the entire population. The more fundamental issue, though, which I think is worth noting, and for those watching who maybe wonder a little bit about the government's role. So I said my ministry, we're a funder, along with a couple of other government agencies, of broadband access. So the Universal Broadband Fund, we administer to partner up with communities and with internet service providers to expand access to broadband internet. We're also a regulator, so we actually do a lot of the regulation of the equipment and of the the telecom companies and so on that actually provide the service. So we have a pretty significant policy role as well as a funding role. And one of the things that governments have been thinking about and worried about for some time, and it's a bit trite to say it, but it's worth reminding ourselves, we are increasingly living in an economy that's enabled by data and enabled by digital. And that's true even of industries that you might think of as being kind of traditional, like take agriculture, for example. A modern farming operation, you might be surprised to learn, actually relies on data and digital technologies, to a much greater extent than maybe the average person might realize. If you look at the market capitalization of the stock market, for example, and you go back to, say, the 1970s, some significant portion of the market cap of the stock market was actually tangible assets. It's actually equipment, buildings, stuff in inventory. Now, actually, the majority of the market cap of the stock market is made up of intangibles. I mean, things that in a literal sense don't even exist. So we're in a knowledge economy that's enabled by, and a knowledge economy where, frankly, a lot of the value is actually in the information as opposed to the physical asset. That makes access to data and digital extraordinarily important. And there's all kinds of academic research that shows that firms that actually adopt digital technologies, that actually, are able to use and manipulate data in these sophisticated ways that we see, now in the 21st century, they actually enjoy a significant competitive advantage over firms that can't do that. And that makes access to the internet and the ability to move large volumes of data, that makes connectivity like the lifeblood. It's actually essential. And so for us, this is an important piece of infrastructure. But it's an important piece of infrastructure because it actually enables economic success and economic competitiveness. And increasingly, it's important for even the smallest businesses in the most remote areas. You may have thought that it's all about high tech. It's actually about everybody. And so that's why we think it's so important to make sure that Canadians get connected.
It's so funny that you mentioned agriculture. I mean, Canada 2020, we ran a big agriculture project last year, and it essentially turned into a connectivity exercise where, you had farmers in rural Canada asking, would you expect, a downtown Toronto business to, run their business on dial-up? And the answer, of course, is no. And I know there's new entrants into the space. I know TELUS is launching TELUS Agriculture today. So there's probably more to explore there. Dean, I want to move to you here. And the purpose of this conversation, obviously, is to talk about, sort of what's next. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to take a minute to look back. When we went into lockdown 9 months ago, and the slow and then very quick realization that our life is going to have to shift entirely online. Can you give us a bit of a snapshot of what that meant for Rogers and what you had to do?
You bet, I will. So starting with Rogers as the company, we would have had hundreds of people working from home prior in an organization of 25,000 people. Within just a number of weeks, we had only a couple hundred folks who were in the offices. Everybody else was working from home. So, but for folks who had to maintain critical infrastructure, we flipped to an entire at-home model. Where we would have historically gone into homes to provision services, we had to move to essentially a video conference with the in-home, with the resident, and deploy, repair, diagnose what was going on in the home with the assistance of someone in the home. And that was an entire change to the way we'd done things. We had to, over 2 weeks, build the kind of network and capacity that would typically have taken us 2 years. So it was an extraordinary time for everybody. And it turned out, I think, as most Canadians know, and I speak maybe on behalf of the whole industry, I think we did a pretty good job making sure everything continued to work when all of the use cases changed dramatically from, kind of serving people who are commuting in an office space downtown to everybody piling in at home with Zoom, with Netflix, with school, with all these other things happening. and everything worked and stayed up and was resilient. As the guy who runs the Rogers for Business side, we support the government substantially. And we had to help Services Canada, the shared services organization, move from being entirely in their offices to being able to speak to Canadians about what was happening and about the programs that were available in a way that had never been done from a digital and remote point of view. So it was pretty extraordinary change.
Michelle, and thank you, Dean. Speaking of change and speaking of opportunity, Telesat obviously featured prominently in the UBF announcement this week. Lots of details to get into, but can you just give us a quick sense of like, okay, what does that mean for not only your company, but also the communities that you're looking to serve?
Sure, absolutely. So we had been working actually quite extensively with ISED on this agreement over the course of the past several months. It was certainly important to us, and we are quite pleased actually partnering with the Government of Canada to bring this capacity to these communities that are underserved today, satellite reliant, underserved, that don't have access to fiber connectivity, in order to deliver at minimum at least the 50 by 10 CRTC service targets, and really get them online and get them access to true broadband, low latency service. So it's a recognition, certainly, that LEO can, in fact, deliver that service. So we acknowledge, and appreciate the support of the Government of Canada with respect to that, the fact that they have confidence in us delivering this to the communities. We have been doing it over the past 50 years. We do it with the technology that we have that is available to us to deliver some of the latest, using the latest advances and technologies. And we have been incrementally sort of adding capacity and growing the capacity and making available capacity into a number of communities across the country. And this is just taking it to the next level and the next step. But truly it will put them essentially at the same, on the same footing as most everywhere else across Canada. So giving them access to 50 by 10, I think they're going to be relieved, and we're really looking forward to doing it.
Willa, I have noticed you've been nodding along very nicely with Simon and Dean and Michelle, and so the reason I was very excited to have you join the panel here is that when I think about connectivity and sort of the whole ecosystem, my mind immediately goes to telecoms and immediately goes to satellites. I tend to sometimes forget about equipment and systems that sort of underpin the exercise. So can you? I know there's lots of folks watching here. I just got a ping from a friend of mine working on connectivity issues in BC. Like, this is sort of a cross Canada stream right now. Can you give us a bit of a sense of, okay, how does a company like Cisco come at some of these issues and act as a connectivity enabler?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm so thrilled to do this, and really appreciate being included in the discussion. Just so people know, in case you haven't heard of Cisco before, and you'll be forgiven for that, we've been making the internet work since 1984, and 85% of the world's internet traffic travels over our hardware and our software, and the networks that we build and support travels securely over these networks. And that capability extends to Canada's remote north. We have been active in and investing in Canada's remote north with a program called Connected North since 2011. And so what we did is, working with a consortia and an ecosystem of NGO partners and private sector partners and some regional governments, we actually created, and obviously in very close cooperation with the communities that we serve, we created a digital network, a digital experiential learning network to connect children in K-12 classrooms from the Yukon to Nunavut to experiences and opportunities that they wouldn't ordinarily have in their own communities. Things like mentoring, mental health and wellness supports, training for teachers, virtual field trips, Indigenous language instruction from one community to many. None of that would have been possible without the investments of bandwidth that we've seen the federal government make over the last few years. And I want to applaud the federal government. All of us at Cisco want to applaud the federal government, because you've really enabled the Connected North Network to thrive. We started in one community in Ahadawich. We were in pilot in 2013. We launched in 2014. We then spun the program off as a dedicated charity doing this incredible work of scale. And as of last week, we went into our 100th school. We now serve 2,000 teachers with a whole on-demand curricula and 20,000 students. So the one thing I will say about all of this, I've worked in a lot of these communities. I've been going back and forth to the north for a long time now. And our purpose at Cisco is this belief that technology can be used for good. And in this case, technology is used to deliver equity of opportunity. And, I'm a mother, and you go up into these schools and you see these kids and you want the best for your kids, and they absolutely deserve the same opportunities as kids in the South do. And, there's an enormous potential in the North, and connectivity is the way to unleash that. So yeah, I am nodding a lot because I think that, I've seen firsthand, we've seen at Cisco, our engineers who go up there to do this work to get telepresence up and running, all the work we do building the digital curricula, all the partners that we pull into the project. And I'm looking at you, Government of Nunavut, if you guys are watching, you've been so awesome. This is tough work. We're playing the long game here, but my gosh, we've got to stick with it, because that really, at the end of the day, is what it's all about, making sure these kids have the opportunities they need to thrive. There you go.
That fantastic. And just a nod to the Q&A here, particularly in Zoom. There's some great questions coming in. I'm going to get to them in a second. But Simon and Dean, we've heard mention of obviously enabling healthcare. We've heard questions about enabling education. There's a lot of stuff that has, I think, taken hold in this emergency response period over the last 9 months. But as we look forward to, post-pandemic, obviously acknowledging the moment that we're in, it's still very serious. The question becomes like, okay, how much of this behavior is sticky, and how much does the work being done to improve connectivity enable those advancements? So, I mean, maybe Simon, I'll go to you here. And this is something I know you and I have talked about a little bit. Like, apart from giving people opportunity, what are some actual examples of things that we're hoping to enable through improved investments that you're making?
Well, I think there's a range of things. So without wanting to be too clever about it, there are the things that we know about, which are existing use cases. And Willa just talked about education, for example. It's a really, really good example. There's been a lot of press reporting and a lot of stakeholders who've talked about, with kids, being at home and people having to work from home. If you're in a rural area, say with connectivity that's not so great, some of the use cases that we're already really familiar with, like the ability to telework, those can be compromised without good connectivity. So I think broader universal coverage will enable the deployment of existing use cases that we actually know about already and that actually work well, say in urban areas or in areas with good internet coverage, but which you can't get if you're in a rural area. Then there are kind of use cases, I would say, that are not speculative, but where they aren't in widespread deployment yet. And so, for example, there has been discussion around some of the use cases that you might see as we get wide deployment of fifth generation technology. So when 5G comes in, we know, because of its ability to transfer very large amounts of data, very low latency, it might actually allow for things like, autonomous, much easier to deploy things like autonomous vehicles and so on. Some of that's speculative in the sense that we won't actually know till the infrastructure is in place, all the possible interesting businesses that might kind of grow in that kind of environment. And I guess that takes me to the last piece, which is there is an element, a measure by which some of the use cases have yet to be defined. And by that, I mean, one, look, I'm not sure economists would necessarily, describe it this way, but you could think of broadband, high-speed broadband, it's like a general purpose technology. It's a little bit like electricity. At the time that electricity was discovered, people might have said, well, why would you build an electric grid? Like, you don't have any use cases. Well, it turns out there's a lot of use cases for electricity once you have an electric grid that works. And I think we saw this after the .com bubble. Dean or others might have a better view of this, but I think there are people that said, there was massive investment in broadband in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Frankly, some of that fiber, in a sense, didn't have a use case. The use cases have been proven out by Netflix and Amazon and on and on and on, and all kinds of business models. Nobody disputes anymore that we're in this knowledge-based, increasingly online economy. A lot of that was enabled initially by investments prior to those use cases being on the table. I mean, as real business propositions. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the government interest in this is we actually know that this unlocks economic value. There's tremendous evidence to show that. We can point to existing use cases. The really interesting thing is what about the businesses no one has even imagined yet, which might be enabled by the wide adoption and deployment of broadband. So I'll stop there.
Well, you know what, Dean, I think that's a great pivot to you. And I heard a lot of keywords. I think I know that matter a lot to Roger. So I'll let you pick up there. Sure.
I think, Simon, you led into this so well. Having been in telecom since the late 90s, you're absolutely right. We didn't know exactly how it would be used. We didn't know that the advent of a smartphone, applications, big screens, 4K would drive demand in ways that we never imagined. In fact, I remember thinking in the early 90s that we didn't need speeds beyond 6 megabit because that's what you needed to watch a hockey game without the puck being jittery on the screen. And here we are where you've got gigabit speeds into houses and businesses, and you can run everything remote and online. So you're absolutely right. We don't know. But what we do know is that the world is basically a world of distributed need. And what that means is that if you can create connectivity that is distributed, that is reliable, fast, low latency, meaning it goes back and forth to the cloud quickly, and private, you can do almost anything with it. For example, we've got mine sites in Saskatchewan that are enabled by kind of remote capabilities that you don't have drivers. You've got a pre-programmed route for these vehicles to move. It's incredibly safe. They've got sensors that determine what's happening with the vehicles, when they need to be serviced. So all of the waste, the cost, and the safety issues of a classic mine site get removed because you've got broadband connectivity, it's untethered, it's private, and suddenly you can you make your business case, the way you operate changes dramatically. We're working with a utility in BC that's using existing sensors to send seismic information back to a centralized command and use AI to determine if there's patterns that they need to be worried about. You can think about, smart cities, smart communities, period. The use of, maybe we're trying to talk about rural Canada, so maybe I'll skip smart cities because who cares about cities? We're more interested in what happens with people further away. But imagine communities that could, all the services they provide are available to their constituency. It's easy to access. It's private. They can tell when things need to be done. They can point citizens to where they need to look. And in this time of the pandemic, that kind of sensible, private, personal communication is incredibly important. We see it across the board. You were talking about agriculture earlier. We see it in ports where you can know what's arriving at your port, your station, your warehouse. You don't need to go in and inspect the crates and do all of that. What you've got is temperature, motion, insect sensors, heat sensors that's sending the information. A manifest is transmitted, and you're able to do a lot of your work in remote and in safe ways that you couldn't otherwise do. So the use cases are honestly limitless.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, I want to bring you in here. because and Simon, I think you're going to have a hand on this ball as well. We've got a couple questions in the Q&A, particularly around being inclusive and involving Indigenous communities and making sure that they have access to this infrastructure and these services. So, Michelle, maybe I'll go to you first, and then Simon, if you want to elaborate and talk a little bit about what I said is doing to ensure that that takes place. But Michelle, let's go to you first.
Sure. So first and foremost, as part of the agreement that we have with ISED, there is a clear objective to connect as many of the remote, and Indigenous communities as we can. Many of them today are deemed to be satellite reliant communities. We actually do serve a significant number of those communities today, and look forward to just enhancing the connectivity to these communities, bringing in more advanced services over our LEO constellation. And also supporting, though, I mean, we talk about economic growth and sort of some of these other applications. A lot of the Indigenous groups and we know some of the Inuit groups are into all kinds of various businesses up north, and they see great potential with the availability of capacity and services over the LEO constellation, because essentially it will probably be the fastest, the highest performing technology to be able to deliver broadband connectivity to essentially everywhere across Canada within the next couple of years, and to do it affordably. So we look forward to working with them to bring just the most basic connectivity that they need, to support school, work at home today, and it's been so obvious that they lack even some of that the most basic connectivity today. They're stretched to the limit. When COVID hit, most of those Indigenous communities came back to us looking for incremental capacity just to be able to meet the surge in demand in those communities. And we responded very, very quickly to give as much capacity as we could to all of these to all of these communities and these various groups. So it's basically to enhance sort of the basic connectivity for education, for work, for just generally their governance, sort of in the links to the South, to promote, just even their economic growth and their local businesses, tourism, anything that they want to do, but to put them essentially on the same footing as other communities have anywhere across Canada. But LEO will be the vehicle to do that, because we can reach everywhere, and it'll be high quality, high performing connectivity.
Right. Willa, I see you're off mute here, and I know that you had talked about connecting to the north before. Before I go back to Simon, I'm just wondering if you had a view on sort of the Indigenous component of this.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So a couple of quick points. First of all, to your point, Michelle, you could not agree more. The Connect North program operates in all 43 schools in Nunavut. The demand is quite significant to be able to resource these online sessions. We can at the moment only run 7 concurrent sessions, but we're in 43 schools, and so more investment is needed so that the opportunities are opened up. The second point that I would make, though, the goal of this investment of bandwidth is to deliver economic vitality, is to achieve those social outcomes, those social benefits in terms of education and health. We need to be thinking in terms of parallel investments in programming in those use cases. It's not good enough just to go in, with the pipe and with the hardware and the software and the WebEx and the wireless and all that other good stuff, unless people on the ground understand how they can leverage it, unless teachers are trained and coached in what digital content is available and how can they deploy that, unless there is some sort of support locally. And there's a lot of communities that we work with that were really open to these kinds of partnerships to build their own capacity. But if you look at telehealth, if you look at digital education, all those things will lead to economic dynamism. But we've got to understand what are those other pieces that we need to wrap around that in significant investment in bandwidth and satellite capacity.
Agree.
Simon,
fully agree.
Yeah,
there we go.
That's good. Simon, let's. I'm curious about your view on Indigenous, and there's been a couple questions about not just treating Indigenous communities as clients or recipients of a service, but being inclusive, involving them in the process, and whether that's ownership or greater participation. What efforts is ISED or across government, what efforts are you taking to act on some of those calls?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I just wanted to sort of agree with Michelle. I think the LEO project will be a significant boon to Indigenous communities, certainly in the North. Indigenous communities are definitely a priority for the government when it comes to connectivity. If you look at the Connect Innovate program, for example, about a third of the money under the previous broadband program wound up being spent to expand broadband access for Indigenous communities. In the Universal Broadband Fund, we're doing a couple of things to try to, frankly, facilitate access. One is we have a navigator service. I don't remember the exact branding of it, but one of the things we discovered with Connect to Innovate in previous programs, you have a lot of communities that want to engage and they want to make an application. They want to kind of play ball and get support. Broadband projects are complicated infrastructure projects in many cases, and it requires a certain level of expertise and specialization, and that can be really tough. You don't have to be an Indigenous community. You can be any smaller community, might not necessarily have people on staff that have that kind of knowledge. So we've got a kind of an intake process under the Universal Broadband Fund that's really meant to provide more boutique service so that actually communities that are interested can come and sit down with us and get a bit of pathfinding and navigation. And Indigenous communities we would see as being actually a pretty critical client, if you like, in that regard. The UBF program also has a set aside specifically to deal with mobile internet for Indigenous communities, because there are going to be some areas where fiber is going to be not really practical or kind of not really economic, but actually mobile would be really, really important. And that could be in the communities themselves, or it could be on certain stretches of roadway and so on. The highway of Tears in BC, many people talk about as being an area that has, frankly, inadequate coverage. That may or may not be something that gets funded under UBF. We have to go through the intake process. But the point being that there is a specific set aside specifically for better connectivity, in particular for mobile. But we would expect a fairly significant number of Indigenous communities to benefit from UBF. It's been a big priority before. It will be a big priority now. And we certainly want to create a process where we can work with communities to help them through the process. So that has been what we've been focusing on.
That dovetails really nicely with a couple questions we're getting, but one that I also had, Simon, which is there's the promise, and actually the expanded promise, right? This went from a $1 billion program in 2019 to a $1.75 billion program here in 2020. But a lot of that comes down to getting money out the door and getting it moving. And I know that there is I think this $150 million is available immediately. Can you talk a little bit about why that rapid response function here is both important and what it's going to tangibly do to get the ball rolling here? Because people have been waiting for this for quite a long time.
Yeah. So again, there was just to sort of, again, emphasize some of these projects, particularly some of the larger projects we might envisage partnering with the infrastructure bank on, for example. These are going to be very, very large projects involving, tens of thousands of houses. These are big engineering projects. Dean and Willa and Michelle probably could describe in much more gory detail. But at the same, so some of these are going to take a number of years, and that's just the basic math of doing a big infrastructure build. At the same time, I think the feeling was there are shovel-ready projects. There are definitely going to be opportunistic projects where the engineering work has already been done, or where, and again, I'm sort of talking a little bit in the abstract, Alex, but it's like all we need to do is lay a piece of fiber from A to B, and it'll enable some real connectivity without necessarily having to have an enormously complicated build. We wanted to have a set aside to identify what are the opportunistic projects that could really move the needle on connectivity, but could be done much more quickly. And in effect, try to have a kind of, it's like Jeopardy. This is like the speed round. Try to have a speed round so that we can get out of the gate quickly and try to deliver as much connectivity as possible in a shorter time frame. And so that's what that window is about. But having said that, we can't do that for the totality of the money because, again, it's the difference, I guess, if you think of traditional bricks and mortar infrastructure. You may have some projects that are already ready to go, shovel ready. Everyone talks about shovel ready. There are going to be other projects that are not shovel ready because you have to do the engineering or the seismic studies or whatever. And so it's a little bit like that here, which is, we want to make sure that the ready to go stuff gets out the gate quickly. We have money set aside for that, a special process. But having said that, the very large builds we anticipate would take some time. That's normal. Obviously, the people that we work for as public servants want us to move as quickly as possible, and we will absolutely do that. Minister Monsef can tell you all about that. So we're going to go as quickly as we can, but we wanted to make sure that the low-hanging fruit got picked kind of right away. That's what that's about.
Well, Dean, yeah, I think you got name checked there on someone who probably has a little bit more detail around like what some of those projects might be and what sort of is the art of the possible, not only near term but in the medium term as well. So, give us a sense, Dean, on sort of the next steps here for a company like Rogers and other projects.
For sure. Well, Simon's very right. There is a lot you can do right out of the blocks. So, for example, in BC, we've got a couple of communities, the Nisga'a Nation and the Witsit, that we've worked with to build actually fixed wireless capabilities. It's mobile as well, but also it can be fixed terrestrial to distinguish it from the LEO work that Michelle has spoken about. And we can bring those communities on very quickly in partnership, which I think, by the way, is also a core tenet of the conversation you have here. It really does take a few groups coming together, the government, the local community, Indigenous or not, and providers to show up so that you can build a service that actually survives and persists and can be maintained and grown over time. And we've done it with those folks. We've done it with the Peguis Nation in Manitoba, and we've probably got 24 on the go right now across the country that actually are relatively quick to turn up, including, by the way, Simon, the Highway of Tears. With one more partnership in there, we'd be ready to go to put connectivity across the entire highway. In that case, it's needing power as a missing element for a land-based solution. So there's a lot, Alex, that you can do right out of the blocks because it's basically what's historically been missing is sufficient funding to at least allow for break-even or near break-even economics, as opposed to a multi-million-dollar investment with no chance that it gets paid back. But if the community shows up and the government shows up through its funding sources, then we can go game on in dozens and dozens of communities immediately with known technology, with existing processes. Longer term, to Simon's commentary, there are things that we can do that are much more, kind of 1,000 kilometers of connectivity with hundreds of communities hanging off of it, that you can then build a program to create access for all of them along that route. Again, something we're working on right now in between BC and Alberta, working in the pipeline space to say, is there a way that we can piggyback on efforts that are already underway to drag fiber connectivity, wireless, both fixed and mobile, to, again, a couple dozen communities that sit along those routes. So, but that's a longer game. That's not measured in months. That's measured in a couple of years to get something like that deployed. Just picking on a couple of examples.
Will, same question to you. What are some of the projects that you, I think, are particularly excited about that are now a little bit more possible? It doesn't have to be perfect. There's still bottlenecks that we need to break through. But what are some projects that you think are illustrative of what's possible now that we're sort of all trying to row in the same direction?
I just have to say, this has got to be the highlight of my 6 months in COVID quarantine. This is such a great discussion, and I just want to echo what Dean said around partnerships and seeing everybody come together with common purpose to really address this issue about equity of opportunity. In terms of where we want to go from here, all things being equal, if we see the bandwidth that we need in some of these communities, certainly from a health and education standpoint, the possibilities are really limitless. I mean, in terms of Connected North, and I'm going to speak on the team's behalf right now, I hope they're watching. We're looking at a self-service digital education platform. That will be our next step in this evolution. We're looking at a day when teachers in those classrooms can literally have the world on their doorstep and be able to develop their own customized learning plans, drawing on multiple resources. I think that, all this software, the hardware technology, increasingly those deployments are easier and easier as technology has become more ubiquitous and more accepted in some of the remote rural communities where we work in. So, and there's, I think also too, there's, and again, I'm speaking on behalf of the communities where we work, but there is an enormous spirit of partnership and openness to working with private sector organizations and NGOs and governments to really figure out how to make all of this happen. I said earlier, we're playing the long game. And I think that the private sector in Canada has an opportunity to really kind of step up and look at where they have capabilities, where they can contribute, because I've been in this space a long time. I've had a long career in the CSR space, but working in Indigenous communities in particular, in remote rural communities, a little goes a long way. Like, the impact is so quick. The adoption that we've seen of education, digital education technologies, it's been like light speed. We went from 1 school to 100 schools in the space of about 5 years. That we haven't seen anything close to that in the South. So that gives you a sense of the opportunity.
Simon, one of the things I was really struck by, and maybe we can get to Michelle, yourself afterwards as well. And I just want to welcome, I know Sarah Minnis has joined us. She's going to be in conversation with Minister Monsef shortly as we wind down this panel here. But Simon, one of the things I was really struck by during the announcement this week, and like I said, this conversation is not intended to entirely be about universal broadband, but I do think it is a good hook and a good place setter. But it wasn't just Minister Monsef out there. It was Minister Baines. It was Minister McKenna. It was our House Leader, Pablo Rodriguez, and it was the Prime Minister. And so, it's tempting to say, like, real show of force. Obviously, this is a real priority, but it did bring to bear that there are other actors within government that have a stake in a role to play in getting this right. Simon, earlier you mentioned the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, and we do have a question on that. It's very specific, so maybe we can go a little bit broad and then go specific. But I think largely, what do you envision the Infrastructure Bank's role, and how is that sort of funding mechanism designed to work with the UBF?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can give my kind of sort of layperson's explanation. It's the way I tend to think of it. So the Infrastructure Bank, you want to talk to Mike Sabia or someone to get the official explanation, but it's it's not really meant to play in the space where a project, if you imagine a spectrum that is going to be like wholly reliant on government support, because the business is just not economic under any circumstance. Like to provide the service would require a very substantial subsidy. That's not the infrastructure bank space. The infrastructure bank space on the other end of the spectrum is also not projects where Dean can go to the bank or the capital markets and borrow the money because the project has got great economics, and Rogers can just kind of go do it on its own nickel, or it can go to the markets and get the money. The bank space is kind of somewhere in the middle, where you have projects that, with the right structure might actually be interesting enough to kind of, go to the market. And so what we're doing under the announcement this week is we have funding where we can partner up with the infrastructure bank for those kinds of projects. So the thinking is that, you have a project that might actually be attractive to the market, that might actually be close to economic, and with some contribution from the Universal Broadband Fund, bang, you're right in the zone where the infrastructure bank can work with its private partners to kind of close the deal. So that's conceptually, that's how I think of it. Is you've got a zone where the bank operates, and we have, we're going to have projects, potentially very large broadband projects that are close to that landing zone, and with a bit of shove from us can get into the landing zone. We're not interested in UBF to fund things that the market's going to do on its own. We have a place, obviously, to be intervening in areas where the market will never make it work. But the thinking is, with the infrastructure bank, we can be in this kind of hybrid area where there can be market participants who are seeking a reasonable return, who will be able to expand broadband in areas they might not otherwise be able to do it. Without us working together with the bank. So that would be the way to think about it.
Dean, so much of what Simon just touched on gets at, sort of core business strategy, where you make investments, where you, where you place your priorities. What has your thinking been throughout this process, and as sort of these new mechanisms get rolled out, how is that having an impact on sort of the lens that you're putting on decisions that you may make over the next weeks, months, etc.?
It's very, very helpful. So we've got to Simon's kind of 3-box description, the piece which we would naturally fund because the returns work, and we're able to make it work economically off of our own balance sheet with our own investments. We're doing that every day, right? 130 cities we're turning up on 5G this year. That's because those make sense, right? They make sense out of the block. Our shareholders and stakeholders like that. What's brought to the table here in the conversation of the Universal Broadband Fund and bringing the infrastructure bank in gives us a range to engage on a bunch of projects that wouldn't meet that first test and hurdle, where our shareholders look at us and say, there's just not enough there. It's a 25, 30 year, if ever, return. It wouldn't make sense to do it. But insert some level of partnership from the government, the bank, and I emphasize the community. And suddenly you can bring in projects that would have had no hope in a purely commercial model. And now you can extend it substantially. And I mean dozens, if not hundreds of communities. So it's a very, very big deal. And we're going to take that very seriously. We've had some initial work, as I suggested. We've been doing a lot of thinking on this, but this announcement is extraordinary. And we expect to be front and center with hundreds of projects that will make sense in this space. So do not underestimate how helpful this is for us to be able to move forward.
And Alex, maybe I could add one small disqualifier, just because I think Dean's absolutely right. But I think part of the project's making sense when it comes to us partnering with the Canada Infrastructure Bank is for that slice of projects, we're probably going to be looking at projects at a certain fairly large scale. But partly because assembling a deal involving us, the bank, private partners, et cetera, the communities, we're probably not looking at, $5 million, $10 million, the kind of smaller projects you might do in individual communities, the kind of stuff that we've been discussing with the infrastructure bank. We're really looking at connecting tens of thousands of projects, probably through a relatively small number of fairly large projects. So that remains to be determined. But I just wanted, just in case folks are watching who are thinking, I'll apply to have my community hooked up. Definitely do that. Come to see us. But when it comes to the infrastructure bank and the work we would do with them, I think we're talking about a handful of much larger scale projects because of the unique, nature of this particular piece, where we're going to be looking at projects that are just, they kind of make economic sense, but they need a nudge, and those are going to be larger.
I think this is a really good segue to Michelle. Sort of same question to yourself. How does the work being done right now and the conversations that we're having have an impact on your business strategy, on sort of your positioning in the weeks and months to come?
So I think, it has huge impact in terms of our strategy, for sure. We certainly have a desire to connect, these rural, remote, underserved communities. The partnership, not just with the federal government, but partnerships with various departments of the federal government, but also territorial governments, other private industry partners, certainly does, help to connect those communities. I would like to highlight as well that the LEO constellation is a massive project, massive undertaking. It would be sort of the largest space-based project ever undertaken by Canada alone. And it's going to lead not just to benefits of connecting Canadians, but it's going to create huge growth in the space in the space domain here in Canada. We do hope to manufacture the constellation of the satellites, build them here in Canada. There will be a supply chain. Telesat is growing in leaps and bounds, and we're hiring as well. And so, the impact overall, we talk about, connectivity, universal broadband fund, but there's a huge upside as well in terms of Telesat, in terms of growing other parts of sort of this sector and industries at large here in Canada as well. And so it's, in our view, it's, to get the government support on those various projects helps us as well in terms of the development of our constellation, but it feeds into other aspects across the country.
And, Willa, same to yourself, such a diverse and complex company that Cisco is, what's some of the upside that you see here? What's some of the biggest opportunity that you see for the work that you can continue, but also now get to do as a result of this moment?
Sure. Oh, well, listen, the upside's the scale, right? And the potential for scale. And, I just was thinking, listening to everybody talk, that really we need to kind of start as we mean to go on. I think what we've all learned during the pandemic is that the possibilities of this new virtual world are limitless, and we've set new standards and new expectations on what we can access and how we're empowered to work now. And just even thinking back to digital education across the north that we're involved in, last entire school year, we delivered 1,900 on-demand sessions, from September to June. In the first 2 months of this year, we've already done 1,400. So that baseline now has shifted dramatically. So I think the opportunity, again, working in really close partnership with our community leaders, is that we're looking at ways to scale, and we're looking at ways to drive sustainability. And we're very fortunate at Cisco that we've got this extraordinary technology that can be leveraged to do just that. How can we make sure that it's simple to manage, and how can we make sure that we're making the incremental investments in content and in support at the local community level, but we do intend to start as we mean to go on.
So we've got about 4 minutes left here, and I'm going to go just a quickly round the horn in a sec. But Simon, my last direct question for you, and if other people want to join in, please. the majority of our audience here at Canada 2020, I mean, they work in a policy function in some way, shape, or form. We typically often ask the question, what is the role of the federal government in, policy issue X? I mean, this, connectivity policy and making advancements and sort of closing gaps. I mean, it's just so clearly such a ripe area for discussion. But for people that are watching, they're working directly on a public policy file. Maybe some of them are at ISED, maybe some of them are in other communities and other levels of government across the country. How would you encourage them to think about sort of the art of the possible and prioritize really making good on the promise that we're trying to make here? If you're a public policy professional, if you're working on some of these files right now, what's the lens that you would encourage people to bring to work every day and bring to that effort?
Well, I can maybe end where I started. I hope people can hear me. My screen seems to be a little on the frozen side.
You're good. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, look, a couple of things. One is, I think it's useful to think of this kind of technology as a multi-purpose technology that's an enabler of economic activity. So it's a critical piece of national infrastructure. It's the reason why the government is stepping in and providing this kind of support. And so, it's not an end in itself. It's part of a broader policy suite that's needed to actually make sure Canada has a modern, competitive economy. So in addition, the government has the digital charter. It's working to update rules for data and digital. It's that broadband infrastructure is part of a broader economic strategy, which is, to help Canada, build a more innovative economy, which is able to compete in the kind of modern world. So it's about internet in rural communities. Absolutely. Is it about making sure people can do their schooling remotely? It's about that. But that's part and parcel of a kind of a broader picture about what a modern society and a modern economy looks like. And so you have to think of infrastructure as kind of this element of a much more pervasive strategy. That's number one. The second thing, I guess I would just say, because I've also seen some of the Q's and A's, is I do think there's a bit of a challenge sometimes, and this is the case, Alex, with other kinds of important elements of public policy too. And when you work as a policy person or in public administration the way I do, you kind of get used to it. But typically things that are really important take time. That's not an excuse, but it's just to say it's like investing in dealing with child poverty or, dealing with climate change. They don't tend to be like, it isn't like on day one you deal with climate change and then you declare victory the next day. When you're making big, important structural changes, that tends to take a bit of time. And I think one of the challenge with rolling out universal broadband to the whole country is, you make the announcement, but actually, as I mentioned, this is a major undertaking. Laying fiber optic cable over thousands of kilometers of tough terrain, putting up a constellation of satellites, these things, even in the best of circumstances, even with all of those early opportunities that we talked about with Dean and so on, to really drive to full coverage is going to take some time. And so I think, there's lots of questions like, okay, where's the result? What will be different? Well, we're already going to see, I'm just looking at the statistics, we're already going to have, 250,000 households that will be connected by the end of this year because of the previous program. But the previous program was announced a couple of years ago. So it takes a little bit of time to see the results. I'm very confident that when you fast forward, to 2026, 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, the massive investment that was announced this week is going to make an enormous difference in communities all across the country. But it's going to take a bit of time to build out that infrastructure. And I can see from the questions that, that is something people worry about, but we're going to keep pushing ahead. And so I would just say that, it's also, you got to kind of just think of the enormity of the task that's been taken on here. It's like building the Transcontinental Railway. Thanks.
I see that Minister Monsef has joined. We're going to get to Minister Monsef and Sarah Minish very shortly. I'm going to ask Willa, Michelle, and Dean just like one or two quick lines about something that you're excited about, have momentum with, or one final takeaway for us. And Dean, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Alex. Just a quick call out to those who are on the line, actually, as or online on the line. The To do this quickly, we've got several of the piece parts in place already, but there's one more that we really need is to, and Simon talked about it in his comments. We need infrastructure that is available to use, poles, ducts, rights of way. These are the physical elements that when you build, if you've got easy and immediate access to it, you can move fast, you can deploy quickly. Canada, unfortunately, is a patchwork quilt for those who control these assets, and it tends to be quite time consuming and slow to get access to these infrastructures. Elsewhere in the world, they're kind of a national asset, and it's seen as you need to enable access to them quickly to enable access to be built quickly. So my call out to those who are online is anything you can do to help on that front would make an enormous difference on behalf of all service providers in Canada. Right now, it's quite a complicated and difficult process to get things built. Thanks, and nice to be here.
Thank you very much, Dean. Michelle, I'll go to you, and Willa will end before we move on to our second half of this presentation here. But over to you.
Sure. Quickly, you know, the one advantage, the one benefit of satellite connectivity is you can actually deploy very quickly. And the last upgrade that we did across Nunavut, we essentially completed, you know, a full 25 community build, bringing in, you know, gigabits and gigabits worth of connectivity. It actually transformed Nunavut. It enabled, you know, LTE services to be launched. And so that's what I'm most excited about. You know, with this recent announcement, we can move quite quickly and deliver across Canada, making a huge, huge change everywhere. And in particular in these Indigenous and very remote communities. Those are the ones that really need the connectivity quickly.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Quickly, Willa, last word to you.
In the communities where we operate, where there is adequate bandwidth, the uptake has been extraordinarily rapid, and we see the results very quickly. But to build on Simon's point, we're playing the long game here. And to build on Dean's point too, there are a lot of moving parts. The ecosystem matters. The level of engagement and commitment matters.
Well, that's a really great note to end it on. And judging by the engagement we have in this session, things are looking good. So that's great. Dean Prevost, Willa Black, Michelle Beck, and Simon Kennedy, thank you very much for joining us for the first part of this very important, very timely conversation. If you'd like to stay on, you can. Just ask that obviously your cameras are turned off. And I want to officially welcome Minister Mary-Anne Monsef to the stream, as well as Sarah Minnis as well. Minister Monsef, thank you so much for joining us here at Canada 2020.
It's a pleasure to be here, Alex. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Minister Monsef. Nice to see you. Thank you for having me, Alex. I'm delighted to be here today with the Honorable Mary-Anne Monsef, Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development. It's very exciting for people that don't know me, which maybe a lot of people on the call don't. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Guelph and also a past president of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. I suggest you check us out if you don't know who we are at crrf.ca. And I'm also a strong rural advocate. Through the many hats that I wear in the world of rural, I've had the opportunity to work collaboratively with Minister Monsef and her staff, and I'm so honored to be here today to dig into a riveting discussion about rural broadband in Canada. It will be hard to top, though, our previous session. So I'll just hand it back then to Minister Monsef to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Alex. Bonjour, Anin, salam alaikum. I join you live from my basement in Peterborough, Coberta, on traditional territory, Williams Treaty territory, the home of the Mississauga. I've been here for about 20 years, a little more, 24 years actually. And this is the only place that I've ever belonged. I want to thank Canada 2020 and everybody who is working so hard in these very difficult circumstances to keep their families safe, to ensure that their teams are okay, and to hold our communities together. This is a big, beautiful country. The strength of our connections is what has helped us fare as well as we have during the crisis. And it'll be these connections that will carry us through the winter and beyond the pandemic. Maybe what I'll share, Sarah, with the very thoughtful people who've joined is a quick overview of what the Universal Broadband Fund brings to the table and how it's different from previous proposals that have come forward, what the intention here is, and share with you my perspective as a mixed rural urban MP. I represent Peterborough Kawartha. It includes the city of Peterborough. It includes several rural townships, and of course, it includes Curve Lake First Nation. Curve Lake being one of those communities that is slowly but surely moving ahead with finally getting clean drinking water. And it is also the place home to Chief Elsie Knott, the first woman to be elected chief of a First Nation in Canada. And following her are a long line of strong women who are rocking it, including the current chief, Emily Wheatung. I want to share with you what the Universal Broadband is very quickly. First of all, this is the second program of our government. The first one was the Connect to Innovate program. I call that the 1.0. This is the 2.0. The Connect to Innovate program supported over 220 different projects in close to 1,000 communities. As Simon Kennedy, my wonderful, hardworking, wears many different hats, Deputy Minister, shared in the earlier panel, that work is underway. Tens of thousands of Canadians are getting connected because of the work we started in 2016. So the Universal Broadband Fund is part two of a coordinated effort by our government to get every household connected to this essential service. The other thing that sets the Universal Broadband apart and aside is that it is actually part of a plan. I get a lot of questions. Sarah laughs, and you would think that there is a plan for a big country like ours to get connected. A lot of the skepticism that I've heard in the year that I've been on this job is, while governments have been promising this for 20 plus years. The truth is, it's not until 2019 that the government of Canada and Canadians actually had a plan to get connected. The people this program is meant to support is those who live in the communities that are hardest to reach, where the business case to move ahead simply is not there because of the complexities in geography and the smaller population densities. The other piece that I've heard a lot of over the year that I've been on this file has been, communities are restless, and they were restless, rightfully so, even before COVID. Those 220 plus projects that are connecting, 1 million Canadians to this essential service. People want to know where the project is at. Are we there yet? Are we going to get connected? Which, announcements were made? Where are we with those? There is now an online tracker for community leaders and individuals themselves to, find their project in their community and figure out exactly which stage it's at. And that level of transparency is one component of including Canadians in these very complex projects. The other way this program is different than others is that we have a partnership in place with Stats Canada to start collecting data on how the connectivity piece is making a difference for communities and households and businesses. And these numbers are going to be essential. As we know, rural Canada never fully recovered from the 2008 recession. And, the numbers just went away in the 10 years before our government. That data was taken away, and we are filling in a lot of those knowledge gaps with this partnership. We also heard from municipalities before and after COVID, the ones who are, hearing the most from their communities, that, 60% of us have 5 or fewer staff working with us. And we've got a lot on our plates. And then COVID hit. And then, the responsibilities for these incredible community leaders increased tenfold. They said, we need help We need capacity. We need somebody to help, hold our hand through this process and make sure that we put forward the best applications possible. Otherwise, we get outcompeted every single time. And because this program is for them, and because our Liberal MPs, and I'll say our opposition colleagues too, made such a clear case for this, we were able to introduce a concierge service, a pathfinder, a one-stop shop, if you will, where you pick up the phone, pick up the phone, and on the other end of the phone are some of Canada's smartest engineers and project managers. I call them the super nerds, who can actually help navigate this very complex ecosystem and process with you, so that, if you're a small community or a small ISP trying to put forward your bid, we can help connect you. Our maps are more precise. The hexagon model is gone. We want to make sure that we leave no one behind. We've also, of course, heard, as one of the speakers in the previous session spoke, there are a lot of cooks in this kitchen, and rightfully so. From satellite to backbone to last mile to fiber to cell to provinces, territories, Indigenous communities, the regulator. There are a lot of people working to connect Canadians to this essential service, and the government of Canada has stepped up with this fund and said, we will help with the coordination here. We will, and we've done that work with the Universal Broadband Fund. We've even shared our application forms with our partners, for example, in provinces who are getting ready to roll out with their programs, Ontario being a really good example, so that we're able to ensure that we make it as easy as possible. We stretch every dollar to its maximum, and we ensure the most efficient way forward, because rightfully so, Canadians want us to keep moving. So what does the program entail? There is, $2.75 billion for the Canada Infrastructure Bank to support higher impact projects that connect a large number of households and businesses. That entity, being an arm's length entity, will be a source. Please feel free to reach out if you have ideas for them. We heard also the need for a rapid response as part of our COVID response. There are communities who have really good ideas right now, from putting antennas on households to replicating that model of driving into the Tim Hortons. Families are packing their kids into the car and they're pulling up into those parking lots just so their kids can do their homework. Well, in Canada, we can do better. In the short term, though, we've heard that there are large community centers that are empty right now with big parking lots, and they don't have connectivity to 5010 right now, but communities have told us, what if we connected that community center and people could come into that parking lot? Would you be open to that? And yes, the answer is yes. The $150 million rapid response stream, we are looking for those good ideas. Send them to us. We will process them within days so that hopefully come Christmas, communities have some certainty about what's coming up in the new year. There's also the core UBF program. This is $1 billion, and it's meant to support those longer term projects with fiber, that future proofing that is necessary. These projects take a little bit more time, and we're ready to support communities every step of the way with the core UBF. We also heard in the response to the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls that there are too many stretches of roads and highways across this country where too many tragedies and violations occur. And without access to cell service, without any broadband, when emergencies occur, there's no way to call for help. We've heard that communities in danger have no way to be notified of whether it's natural disaster or otherwise without this essential service. So part of what we've included in the program the Prime Minister launched on Monday is a separate stream, $50 million for mobile projects, particularly ones that support Indigenous communities, so that we can better address too many highways of tears across the country. So Sarah, I've given you a very quick overview of the different aspects of this program. I'll leave it with this, and then we'll go into what I hope is a super nerdy and super fun chat. This is the program we've designed. This is a program that Canadians helped shape. This is your plan. This is the plan that you asked for. You asked us to consider that the most important word in the whole thing be flexibility, for backbone, for last mile, for mobiles, for flexibility with capacity of the various entities who would be applying. We heard you and we've delivered. And at this point, the ball is in your court. We are looking to get projects from you for the rapid response and for the core UBF and for the Canada Infrastructure Bank. They'll be receiving those applications separately. But we're looking for those applications. And my team and I are looking for a way to get to a yes with you. At this point in the pandemic, as we look ahead to a very long and difficult winter, we think about vaccine rollout and the recovery from the pandemic. We cannot afford to leave anyone behind. And as you look at our competitors and our partners around the world, they are investing in broadband. And when this thing is over, the transition to the digital economy will have been, moved ahead light years, and Canada cannot afford to be left behind. As Barack Obama said, the world needs more Canada, and we need to stay connected as Canadians to get through the next, difficult chapter and come out on the other side stronger and more resilient than ever. The Universal Broadband Fund and our government's investments in connectivity are a foundational piece to get us there.
Thank you so much, Minister Monsef. It's been an exciting week, certainly, with the further announcement, with more funding for the UVF and anyone that lives and works in rural or works with communities like myself. It's pretty exciting. But before we talk more about, say, the impact of the pandemic, as well as the Universal Broadband Fund, which I do have a few questions about specifics, how about we get to why this matters and why this is so important for rural areas, especially for people on the call that may not be familiar with the issue. Prior to COVID and all this happening, and clearly COVID reasons that we need internet, what did rural broadband look like in Canada, and how big was that divide between rural and urban?
I think one of the previous speakers described it very well as a patchwork quilt, where the business case was strong, where the population density was high. Really important investments were made for quality infrastructure. And 98% of Canadians living in urban centers have access, but 2/3 of Indigenous communities do not. 60% of rural communities do not. And what that actually means right now is, for those who have parents in long-term care, there is no way to stay connected with them. For those who are doing their best to learn online, like a young woman who was on The Current earlier this week, a brilliant, articulate Inuk woman studying at McGill, should be able to have every opportunity to get ahead, to speak for her community, to contribute to her own professional development and our country's growth. She doesn't have access to high-speed internet right now, and she has to leave her community, go to a hotspot of the virus just so she can continue her online learning. It means businesses on main streets, particularly right now, who are ready to pivot and expand their markets and create greater jobs, don't have that, aren't able to have that path to the next stage of their viability. And I'll say this to you, Sarah. Somebody like me comes to this country and within 20 years gets to put their name on a ballot and gets to represent the community that's given her so much. I used to stay in a shelter. I relied on food banks. I was able to complete my studies and work at the same time. And when I got that BlackBerry Pearl, I got a red BlackBerry Pearl, and that was the beginning of my productivity going up. My ability to build networks and stay connected increase. And I've kept that BlackBerry, obviously, but there are too many Canadians, millions of Canadians, whose potential is not achieved because of this one precondition to their success, which is connectivity. And we can't afford that.
Yes, and I know in a lot of rural places, sometimes they are checked off in that hexagon model of being serviced, but don't always have reliable service. For example, my parents live 40 minutes outside of North Bay, and they do have high-speed internet, but it's constantly going out depending on the weather. Self-service is always disrupted, and even landline service is sometimes disrupted, along with, you know, all sorts of other services that it's just become kind of the way of life in rural, and unfortunately, it really shouldn't be.
I was actually just virtually in North Bay with MP Rhoda earlier this morning. And yes, the hexagon model is gone. Thanks to everybody who pushed for it to be gone, for our maps to be more precise, and we're sharing those maps. But yes, you know, the frustrations that I've read in correspondence that has come from folks who live a stone's throw away from centers where the connectivity is there, in those suburban communities, as well as communities like North Bay, those stories have been top of mind for us in developing this program.
And for people that don't know what the hexagon model is, it's been largely criticized by everyone, where there's all sorts of patches that you may have patches within the hexagon that are serviced. So the whole section is checked off as serviced, but there's patches within that hexagon that are not serviced with high-speed internet. So maybe just while we're talking about it, what has been replaced with the hexagon model?
So the new maps, so the hexagon model, and I have a hard time believing that anyone but those who are like deeply involved in the broadband ecosystem are on this call, but if so, hi. But under the hexagon model, the coverage information was previously available by area of 25 square kilometers or more. Now it's down to 250 meter road segments, which means we have a much more detailed picture of the gaps, and it's going to make sure that we don't leave people behind, and we're continuously improving the precision of those maps to ensure that, you know, this foundational piece to every project is as tight and as accurate as it can be.
That's great. That's wonderful to hear. So as we know, and you've mentioned some of the impacts specifically of COVID-19 and how it's exposed and exacerbated pre-existing challenges, the pandemic has forced us to stay inside and rely more on technology for pretty much everything, to continue in life professionally, socially, educationally. And there's been certainly that digital by default approach that has impacted kind of how everybody has been doing business thus far. And we've seen that certainly with how education has been delivered, health services, and even accessing government programs like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit claims, which also gets into not only, you know, having high-speed internet, but also having that digital literacy to ensure that those residents, either who are new to high-speed internet, who maybe have taken advantage of some of the funding and they're new to high-speed internet, that they're aware of, you know, how to use the technology that comes with it, and they have the technical skills and the know-how on how to use the information and communication technologies that they have. Is there anything as part of the universal broadband funding that speaks to that digital literacy component?
So I'm the minister responsible for rural economic development, and my number one priority at this point is getting the highest possible quality applications in for rapid response and for the core UBF, because, you know, that the precondition to all of that is the basic access to a quality connection. So I will put that there, and then I'll leave another piece over here maybe, and that is, we've done Parliament by Zoom. We've done meetings online. We're learning online. Just before this call, I was talking to my partner. He's in Fredericton. I'm in Peterborough. I think that we can all agree that there's no substitute to the personal connections. There's no substitute to being in the room. And so I think that there's a really important balance to maintain to preserving those connections and those relationships, which, predate internet. That said, I truly believe the Universal Broadband Fund is the best thing since the internet, because it will provide people with that access. My colleague, Minister Baines, has been a big part of this work too for many more years than I have. There's another piece with this program, with the digital economy, which you rightfully touched on, which is the labor force that we're going to need to shape the future of our economy, to shape the next generation of these technologies, has to be literate, but also the people who are consuming this need to have those skills. Minister Baines has done a really good job at supporting and securing funds, for example, for CAN Code, to make sure that our kids, particularly our daughters, have a pathway to getting into the tech sector, which is good paying jobs. We need this particular sector to grow so that Canada's economy can remain competitive. But this is a sector where only 26% are women, and those women get paid 26% less than their male counterparts for the same work. So there's work to be done in evening out that playing field. For me, the priority right now is ensuring that those towers and antennas and fiber and whatever creative solutions are there to get people connected are there. But one of the things that Canada going for it, and my own officials are a really good example of this, like Simon Kennedy. We have some of the world's best and brightest and most talented people, the most talented professionals in this sector now. And Canada, particularly with the Universal Broadband Fund launch now, is set, well positioned to outcompete our partners globally. And a big part of that will be maintaining and supporting the talent to do that. So that's part two. Part one right now, first things first, we got to get people connected so that the pandemic itself is a bit more bearable for them.
That's great. And I was so glad to hear about, the plan for the funding and your emphasis on there actually is a plan. The online tracker will be so useful for communities, as well as the data component. Something we've been pushing, certainly rural researchers have been pushing for a long time. And the concierge service, I think, will be really important for bringing people who have, shovel-worthy projects that maybe aren't necessarily ready to go right away in terms of an application, but working with communities on that is so important. We know that a certain hurdle in this country is that we have very few telecommunications providers. How do you plan to keep pressure on them to maintain low internet rates for rural and urban Canadians? And is the government prepared to take legislative action to further regulate the telecommunications market? Or would the government be perhaps willing to follow a model like SaskTel and offer a Crown Corporation alternative?
All very important questions. I'll tell you that the broadband fund has included, I call them mega consultations, with all sorts of service providers, larger ones, smaller ones, Indigenous communities, municipalities, Canadians themselves. And a component of eligibility for the Universal Broadband Fund is being able to demonstrate, first of all, that your price point is going to be reasonable and provide that affordability. Okay. Another, particularly for backbone projects, there's a requirement to share access, which will lead to greater stability and competitiveness. In addition to that, our folks, and Simon is well aware of this. The regulator is doing its work, and we're supporting and waiting for some conversations to be had around passive infrastructure and the next steps on sharing the poles and the assets that one of your previous speakers spoke about. The priority right now is to roll out the program. Mm-hmm. And for me, that, the precondition to, affordability, the precondition to A green recovery, the precondition to a she-covery, a full recovery, is making sure that that access is there in the first place. There's a recognition too around, the affordability piece being about value for money. Right now, there are too many rural Canadians who are paying too high of a cost for very poor internet, and making sure that they have adequate service, that no one is left behind is my priority. Minister Baines is working very hard with industry partners to lower the cost, and we are committed to lowering the cost for connectivity for families. There's a $10 a month plan, for example, for families with children, and there's more work to be done with telcos. That work is moving ahead. But for now, if get those applications in to us. Best Christmas gift that you can give me and my team is a surge of applications that for a few days overwhelm us, but really that would be the best next step for us forward. And Minister Baines has the affordability portfolio in very good hands.
Great. Okay, I just have one more question, and then we're going to open the Q&A up to folks. So ensure you put your questions in the Q&A box or in the comment section if you're visiting us via YouTube. So my last question is, a few weeks ago, we saw the launch of Apple's latest smartphone, the iPhone 12, which has 5G capabilities. This phone and many others are ready for the next stage in communications and connectivity. Can you talk to us a bit about the plans for 5G connectivity in this country and how the government plans to manage the urban-rural divide?
A big part of managing the rural-urban divide is ensuring that rural Canadians are able to see themselves in our policies. A rural lens is applied to our COVID response, for example. This is the first time ever. And the broadband fund, the Universal Broadband Fund, was developed by them for them. As you mentioned, though, the scalability of what we're building, the ability of the infrastructure to meet even higher needs is a key consideration. Where fiber is the best option, we're going to go ahead with it. It can be scaled up to greater speeds. And there are, as you said, other technologies that are going to be needed to help meet the needs of Canadians both now and in the future. Those technologies are under review, and the security and the privacy of Canadians and the well-being of Canadians will be top of mind in making those decisions around, these beyond the good enough approach that you had spoken about, these greater capabilities.
That's great. We often get into the issue where targets become floors, as my colleague Ashley Whedon would say, and Wayne Kelly. The targets mentioned in the Universal Broadband Fund, which is the 50 megabytes per second download speeds and the 10 megabytes per second upload speeds, is quickly becoming out of date as we move into the future. So is there plans specifically in the UBF that or plans with the federal government that over the years as technology changes to also adapt that target download and upload speeds to ensure that rural areas don't lag behind?
Absolutely. So this was one of the first questions I asked when I got this job, is how do we future-proof our investments?
Yeah.
Where fiber is an option, that's where we're going to go. Communities right now who have 5.1, what the baseline, the bare minimum we want to get them to is 50-10. But of course, in our analysis and assessment of the applications that come forward, we will be favoring those who are able to go beyond that benchmark, because absolutely these projects take time, it costs money a lot. People decide where they're going to live based on where there is connectivity, and we want to make sure that in a few years from now, the next person in my chair will be able to say, okay, they made some good decisions, they looked ahead, they prepared for the future. Our colleagues from Telesat were on the line. They're a really important part of the puzzle as well in communities where fiber is not an option, where satellite technology is the only way forward. We've seen in studies, for example, in Michigan, they've done studies where they've compared the different satellite options that have come forward, and the Canadian option, Telesat, has been recognized as the most responsive and the best quality option with the technologies they're offering. So Canadians can rest assured that we're going to do everything we can to set us up for technologies and opportunities that we haven't even thought about right now, but are able to scale up our investments to meet those future needs.
That's so important. We always worry about with these types of fundings, as someone that works directly with communities and communities, that these funding doesn't create winners and losers, or they don't pit communities against each other to go for the same pot of funding. I know there's different funding streams available with the UBF. Do you feel that there's enough to go around for every community, to get every community, say everybody applies who's not currently connected? Is there enough to go around?
This is the single largest investment in broadband in Canada's history. In fact, if you add up the investments that our government's made over the past 4 or 5 years, they are 10 times higher than all previous governments invested in broadband before us. And so this program is what Canadians asked for. The best possible problem that we could encounter is such a high demand with high quality projects that my colleagues and I need to go back to our wonderful Deputy Prime Minister, our Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, and the Prime Minister and say, folks, the demand is so high that the business case is there. This is an essential service. Could we add to these funding envelopes? So for the rapid response stream, which closes mid-January, it's first come, first served, and will fund up to $5 million worth of applications. For the core UBF, the first intake closes mid-February. We really look forward to supporting high quality applications to come forward. I really hope that the demand will be so high that we'll have to make the case for additional investments. But at this time, I can assure you that the numbers we've come up with are based on extensive conversations with our partners across the country. And we look forward to rolling those dollars out. They're ready. We're waiting for you. Very smart officials are waiting on the other end of the phone and the line to process those applications as quickly as they come in.
That's great to hear. So we do have a question from the audience. A previous speaker mentioned trying to launch connectivity programs in rural areas for use with industry, mines, pipelines. Will the UBF provide funding for projects with primarily industry-based uses related to the energy sector? Sorry.
That's an excellent question. I'll speak about how we're measuring our connections at this point, and I'll speak to who is eligible, mostly by talking about who's not eligible. The targets right now are based on the numbers of households connected. That said, that does not preclude businesses and other public entities. As I said, we have a partnership with StatsCan to developing this data, so there's absolutely room for that. The private sector is definitely included as an eligible partner. The only people who cannot apply are individuals and agencies of the Crown. So Parks Canada, for example, or FedDev, the regional development agencies cannot apply. As long as you're applying for a region or community that does not currently have access to 5010. As long as you're applying with an ISP on board to move your project forward, we should talk.
Great. We have another question from the audience. What were the main causes for the delay in launching the UBF? It seemed like it was ready to go in June, but did not actually launch until this month. What were the barriers?
That's a really good question. We were ready to go actually in March, and then the pandemic hit. and we had to make sure that we were ready to process applications without delay. And we had to make sure that we were ready to process a rapid response stream in a really thoughtful way. Something like this has never existed before. So we took the time to get it right because Canadians are counting on us to get this right. The product that we've launched earlier this week is very much in line with what we heard across the country. I was speaking to our partners at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities on Monday, and they said, you know, we told you it's better to take your time and get it right. You got it right. This is a really good day for rural Canada. And now that this thing is ready to go, folks, the ball is in your court. We are looking for those applications that have been, you know, ready to go. We will not miss a construction season. The rapid response stream, we will process applications within a matter of days because we took the time to set up the infrastructure behind the scenes to get it out the door as quickly as possible. So we're ready, and I know that Canadians are too.
Wonderful. Well, I'm being told we have to wrap things up now. I know that we could talk all afternoon, but thank you so much, Minister Monsef, for joining us today and sharing your insights and good news about rural broadband investments and plans in Canada. And as usual, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Also, thank you to everyone who's joined.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I hope that you all take care of yourselves. We're going to be counting on you every step of the way to implement this right. I know that we've already asked a lot of you, so please stay safe, take good care, and stay with us. We need to get this done right for generations who will come after us, and we really appreciate all the ways that you've been solid partners.
I'm going to jump in here too, and thank you both very, very, very much for spending some time with us today. This event was on our calendar, and lo and behold, we had plenty to talk about this week. So Minister Monsef, thank you very much for spending some time with us. Sarah, fantastic job stick handling the conversation. We've got more questions rolling in here. Minister Monsef, I know that your office is very receptive to receiving questions, so we'll make sure that we send them your way. And to the panel that came previously, Simon, Michelle, Dean, and Willa, thank you very much for your participation. Minister Monsef, Sarah, you can jump off the call if you want right now. I'm just going to say a few quick words. Thank you very much about what's coming up next in this series. So thanks very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, Minister Monsef. For those of you still on the call here, as you can tell, this is a series that we're doing here at Canada 2020. The next of which will be a conversation that we're hosting next week, next Thursday. We're going to be shifting our focus to our energy sector and the shifting and the transformations happening in Canada's energy market. The Honourable Seamus O'Regan is going to be joining us for that conversation. We're going to have some more details about that soon, but you should be receiving registration notice of that shortly. But do stay subscribed to our YouTube channel for updates. Hit that little bell thing. You'll get notifications of when we're going live. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you all again. And wherever you are, stay safe and stay in touch. Thanks very much.